Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone that's joined us on the call. Um, People will likely be joining throughout the meeting, and then this will also be recorded. If you're unable to attend, we'll be sending it out. But just wanted to welcome you. Thank you guys for joining today's webinar hosted by our Volunteer Services Department on posting virtual toolkits during the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Kevin Pappas. I'm the training manager here at 10C. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you guys, it's nice to meet you, and hopefully you've been able to attend some of our other webinars. We have a few others this week. We have one on Wednesday on how to engage your board during COVID-19, as well as one on Friday related to the financial resources available to nonprofits through the SBA loan, and some other details there. So if you haven't been tuning into some of our webinars, they're on our resource page at 10c.org if you want to check those out. But today I'm excited to jump in. We have Ursula Walsh, our Volunteer Services Director, or I should say our Director of Volunteer Services, and then Lolly Luna, who's our Volunteer Services Coordinator, who are going to be facilitating most of the webinar today. But we're going to be going through a few different points, and I'll let them take it away with the agenda. But we're going to be discussing virtual volunteering ideas, which includes skill-based volunteering, and really highlighting the need for that in nonprofits, as many of you have probably likely experienced through the unfortunate circumstances we're all in. Many staff have been furloughed, budget cuts have happened, and because of that, we're not operating with the full workforce that we're used to, and new challenges are presenting themselves, and there's skill gaps where nonprofits are trying to figure out solutions and find people and human capital to fill those solutions. And so today we really want to just position you guys for success and let you know how volunteers can fill that gap, how skill-based volunteers can provide their knowledge and their resource and their expertise to provide that service to your nonprofit, and how that can contribute to their engagement and success as well. We'll also be covering the basics of how to scope out one of those projects. So what does it look like to clearly define how that volunteer can help you and provide guidance and support for them so that they feel well supported as they support you in those different projects. We'll give you some examples of what those virtual projects might look like. And then we'll also be discussing our virtual volunteer challenge, and I'll let Ursula share more about that, as well as our National Days of Service and our Emergency Volunteer Center. And we'll finally kick off, and we'll have another webinar actually later next week, but talking about our virtual Spirit of Volunteerism Awards and ways that you can recognize your volunteers during this time, even though you can't meet with them in person. So we're excited for you guys to learn about all that stuff today. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Ursula.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Fantastic. So I know, right now we're in a time where we want, well, we're probably fearful for ourselves, right? We're concerned how we can engage, re-engage, or find new volunteers and keep them excited about our missions, about what we're doing. I think one of the things that we've noticed is when resources get tight, right away we tend to jump, well, what corporation can we get involved? How can we get them involved? And now is not really the time to be thinking about the funding aspect. It's really about how many different ways that you can engage your volunteers and really be building that strong relationship with those companies. There are so many organizations and companies out there that want to be able to help, but your organization may not have the right fit for them just because maybe it's more of a hands-on opportunity, or maybe it's happening on the weekend and they need it during the weekday when their company will let them off. So our goal today is to take you through some virtual opportunities that you can start to incorporate. Our goal is, this is the first of many. Of course, we should have been doing this for the last 10 years in so many different ways. And as a sector, if we can become creative and really use this time to be innovative, talk about resources, talk about companies, gifts and sponsorships, all of those kind of things are going to go way up as we go back to our new normal, because of the way that we engage our volunteers or their volunteers at this time. So I'm really excited about today because I think it's something that many of us have had discussions about it many times, and how can we do this better? And now as a sector, and certainly as Orange County, we might be forced to do it a little bit better this time. But again, sometimes when things are at its worst, we become at our best. So I am excited to get involved with you guys today and to talk a little bit about virtual volunteering. If we can go to the next slide. So just a definition of virtual volunteering, because a lot of people think that it's really about the internet or the computer, which is true, but really it's about offsite from the organization. It's how you're doing, how you're providing volunteer experiences, volunteer engagement, not at your building. And I'll give you a good example of the Orange County Food Bank, because when I met Mark, their executive director, many years ago, they had just so many volunteers, and it was such an amazing experience, and he's such an amazing leader and a great staff. But they also would tell me that they would run out of things and run out of product for volunteers to get involved. So they had the opposite problem. They had too many volunteers asking to come in and pack food boxes, although during COVID-19, that is not the case at this time. So we, of course, are encouraging folks to get out to the food bank, as well as many other basic needs organizations. Unfortunately, they couldn't figure out a way to make it work for them, how someone could do it virtually. And when we sat down, we came up with what we called compassion boxes. And compassion boxes were boxes that folks could pack together. Again, you could go down, the local grocery store or your 99-cent store, wherever you're shopping, buy these specific items, get a group together, small group together, maybe even a family together, and then pack this box and then deliver it to the Orange County Food Bank. It was a way for the volunteers to virtually provide the same service as what they were providing when they would show up at the warehouse. The great news is all that food was now being donated, and it was being bought by, whether it's a company or a family or a church group. Again, people were doing it outside of their doors and making a huge impact. So when it got to the point where those clients that they serve, it's getting low on food, now they had a backup resource. And so it's just a great way, an example to see how you can take what you currently have and translate it into something else. Next slide, please. So again, Kevin really talked about today's agenda. I want to make sure that we're focusing on ideas for you. I think that's the big part of today. And Lolly will be doing a great job of giving you all kinds of ideas. And we'll also talk a little bit about how to scope out a skill-based project, because although we know that engaging our folks, and especially in organizational gaps at this time, is paramount, we want to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. And again, building that long-term relationship by the quality and the engagement process that they're going to be involved in. And then also, as he mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up from our virtual Earth Day through our virtual Spirit of Volunteerism. So lots of virtual stuff, so sorry about that. Next slide. So I just wanted to remind you guys, and maybe you've never even seen this before, this is how we work with our companies and, of course, our large groups that come to volunteer. We feel like we're the hub when we get these calls. Of course, our business support can come in a lot of different ways. We want you to be able to get volunteers. We want you to be able to create stronger and long-term partnerships. And of course, we want those sponsorships to come out of that. But the way that we really do that is by providing, or the way that you're going to be doing that is by providing that volunteer support. Either those one-time, sometimes it's a custom project that we've reached out to you for. You might have an ongoing project that we can get these folks involved in, certainly on the skill-based, more of the business resiliency side, and of course, board leadership. So those are the ways that we want to be able to support you, and we want to connect with you on a regular basis. Next slide. So some of you probably have never seen this engagement continuum, but it's the way, of course, that we do our work every day. It's just a nice visual for you guys to see this. We have what we call our hands-on to our financial support, and really that's building a culture of philanthropy. A lot of times we want to skip all of these steps and get to the end zone, of course, the funding. And that will come. I've been in this business for, almost 30 years now, and I've never run out of things to do. I've never run out of people to help, and I certainly have never run out of people that are willing to give of their time, talent, and treasures. So this is the way that we as, let's say, volunteer coordinators, directors, people that are championing volunteer engagement can do our best work by making sure there's opportunities in all these areas. Right now, we've been focusing a lot, or prior to COVID-19, we've been focusing a lot on hands-on volunteering. But it doesn't mean, again, just like that food bank example, that that can't become a virtual opportunity for you as well. We certainly want to build our skill-based pool, so our experts, and of course, being able, in this time, to be able to pull people in, maybe even to answer a question for us, whether it's related to funding or related to volunteers or related to how we're working with a certain company. Certainly there's people that have general skills that we need and can help us, but it's on those projects that's just so paramount to how we can really do our best work. As we're getting them involved in hands-on volunteering, as we're getting them involved in virtual volunteering, and certainly as a skill-based volunteer, that really leads to that next step, which is that leadership role. If our folks, entered our system as a volunteer, let's say, helping, pack a snack bag for a kid, or mentoring a child, or, God forbid, making sure that this person is still healthy in this time of crisis, they're going to be so much more invested in our mission. And when they move up that channel and move into that leadership role, what an amazing opportunity for them, as well as what an amazing resource for us. And that's really where that funding comes through, because they've already built that engagement. They've already built a platform where your mission, our missions, are the most important thing that they do in their lives. And most people say, as I retire, how can I give back? How can I do more? What's next? Well, if they're asking those questions, that means that we aren't doing our job to engage these folks in the first place. It's great that, people can retire in this beautiful Orange County. We've got great beaches and golf courses and all these wonderful things that people can do in a normal, non-COVID, environment. But they want a meaning in their lives. They want to do more, and we just aren't there asking them if they want to get involved, or we're not providing an opportunity for them to get involved. So I really wanted you guys to see this, because when we go into all these ideas, just know this is not necessarily about COVID-19. It's about how we can change what we're doing as a sector and really as a movement in this nonprofit space. So it gets me excited, because I know it's great work that we all can be doing and probably should have been doing a long time ago. Now is the right time, right? So next slide. So just know, in terms of a skill-based volunteer, we're really going to be focusing on the core business skills. Again, it's really looking at their talents, how much time can they give us, and ultimately, again, can that turn into treasure for us? Maybe return on our volunteer investment, maybe our dollar value goes up because now these folks are, providing some more pro bono services, just making a huge, huge investment in our organization. Next slide. So just real quick, this is really a slide from our Service Enterprise program. And if you haven't been involved in that, we certainly can get you some information about that. But it's really about how to change your organization and integrate volunteerism into every part of your organization. It's not a department. Again, volunteerism isn't something else to do. It's really what we do and how these skill-based volunteers fit in there. I put this graph out because this is the best of the best. This is our top nonprofits within our country. And even within our top nonprofits, we have a couple areas that we are still struggling with. And one area is certainly with our skill-based volunteers. Really at this time, our skill-based volunteers, we only work with them about 6% of what we could be doing with them. And out of that 6%, 8% of those, we really don't even clarify the roles of what this volunteer could do. Or worst case, 13%, we don't even provide the right resources. Maybe they are working on a financial project for us, but we don't give them access to the budget, or they came into our organization and didn't have a computer to work with. In this case, we're going to be able to do this virtually. So how do we provide the right tools, the right resources, the right foundation to make this successful? So just know, even at the best of the best, if we're at our best, right? We still have such a great range for improvement. And really it focuses in on what we're doing with our skill-based volunteers and how we're working with them at this time in a very virtual manner, but in the future, how we just engage them ongoing. So on that, I'm going to pause for some questions if you have any questions.
Yeah, hi, Ursula. I have a question. Do you have any resources or understanding of why skills-based is the lowest or weakest point?
Yeah, so the data shows us it's really about how we set things up for them. And some of it is as dumb as, oh gosh, we didn't even have a work setting for them. They show up and there's no, desk to sit at, which I hope that we're beyond that. Most of it is that when we scope out projects, we tend to change the projects, and that creates confusion, not only on the nonprofit side, but certainly on the volunteer side, as well as the ultimate outcome of that project is unsuccessful. And I'll give you an example. So we recruited a volunteer. Their focus was going to be on making a couple of different collaterals for this organization. We recruited a person that was great at making flyers, let's just say. They're great graphic artists, really know their stuff, really understand how to show a story, and share our missions. When they sat down to do the project, then they were asked to do a website. And like, oh, actually, that's not really my expertise. I put these things together. Yes, I can do some of that, but that's not really what I'm an expert in. So the scope of the work changed once we engaged that person. And just like, how we call mission creep, we're creeping out into areas that maybe aren't really focused with our mission. We do the same thing with projects. So once we find this amazing person, then we're asking them to do more and more, and not necessarily what that project or that gap really was. I go back to always our consultants. If we were hiring someone, we're paying them thousands of dollars to come in and make us flyers or build a website or consult on our finances. We're going to make sure that is just fully vetted. This is how much time it's going to be. This is what we need you to do. This is when you need to do it by this date, and then we're going to hold them accountable. But for some reason, as a sector, we still, when we hear the word volunteer, our brains go out the window and we start treating them differently than what we would do when we paid someone to do that particular project in the exact same way. So it's really about us being more strategic and deliberate on what we're asking them to do, as well as it doesn't matter that they're a volunteer, holding them accountable for the work that they're supposed to be doing. So as a sector, we can get much better at that. We do it somewhat well with our boards, and we need to translate it now into the different areas of our organization. Any other questions? Great. Well, I'm going to pass it on to Lally for the good and fun stuff, and hopefully we'll get some great ideas that you can take back today and get going right away.
Thank you, Ursula, and please feel free to chime in. So just to discuss a little bit about what a toolkit is, it's really just creating a step-by-step guide for volunteers, just transformed in an easy way. So one is you definitely want to give background information for your organization, right? Who are your clients? And what is really the project? So I've seen many opportunities before where there's not really background for the organization. And I think it's important for these volunteers to know why they should get involved, but as well as so that they find something that they're passionate about. So as I mentioned, you want to make sure that it's easy for these volunteers to complete on their own. So really laying down those steps for them, as well as they should be easy enough where everybody can participate, including maybe even children. An important point is that you definitely want to designate a contact for questions from these volunteers, as well as if you're asking for some type of donation or supplies, things that the volunteers will be assembling, they need to know where they can drop this off. So that's really sort of the backbone structure of the toolkit. And I'm sure many of you have seen examples before. So I'll show you an example of this face mask toolkit. Very simple. Let's see. Okay, so here's a small example. It just has a few steps explaining to you how to make a face mask, and it'll give you the supplies that are necessary, right? What type of fabric are you using? Is it appropriate for men or women? The sizes, so any information that you can give these volunteers to make it simple so that they can really just get down to the project itself. As you can see, this one has about 8 steps. And it has a little graphic just to help. So that's one quick example. Down here. So as Ursula mentioned, it's really about transforming these projects. Like she mentioned, those compassion boxes, that was a hands-on project. And it just really takes for us to be creative and seeing how we can transform those into virtual opportunities. And again, so 2 outlets in which you can do that is posting for our Emergency Volunteer Center, which you mentioned were the disaster-related volunteer needs, as well as the virtual opportunities for Earth Day. So that is not on a pause, but just how can we be creative and transform those? So we really looked at sort of categories on the type of toolkits that you can create. So one to mention was working with companies or group volunteering, since they tend to come in large numbers. So many of these nonprofits, even if they had hands-on projects, they're not allowed to take more than 10 to 15 people. So is this something that volunteers can do on their own, and how can you make that easy for them? So of course, one, right, the step would be to create the toolkits, really explaining the projects such as creating hygiene kits, creating reusable masks or face masks, organizing the logistics. So as I mentioned, if these volunteers will be doing the work and then just dropping off items to you, what is the best place to do that, their point of contact, and the time. As well as, since a lot of companies and larger groups tend to like a little bit of competition, right? A fun way to get them engaged. So how is it that you can do that when you're creating, let's say, a food drive? And maybe it's them virtually setting up a team, right, amongst different households, and see how many X amount of supplies they can create for you. As an example of that, I'll show you in a backpack kit. We'll see what that looks like. Here it is. This is an example from 211. They give a little bit of background for the project. Oh, sorry about that. And then they really start off with the general instructions. So they thank them just for their commitment. They express how they can build a team, such as hosting a meeting, as well as just advertising it to other people that might want to join them. And then they right here designated a contact person and gave a little bit of the basics, like a timeline for this project, how long should it take them to make, and to set a goal for themselves. And then below it, it'll give them the list of items that are needed for these volunteers to collect. So if you have specific items, it'd be important to note those down, as well as maybe your top priorities. And then I think pictures tend to be very helpful. That way the volunteers don't overthink, you know, for example, what kind of lotion should they be bringing? So maybe it's as simple as you know, no odor or hyperallergenic lotions, you know, just to be as specific. And then below it, it gives them the steps on how they would be assembling these kits and where they would go to donate it. So they give the address there and a time frame and the point of contact person. And then a little reporting section, so that way they can really know how many kits they created, and then they can report that information back to you as well. So as I mentioned, in larger groups, it's important to create sort of a team building engagement. So an example of that could be encouraging those groups, right, to create that virtual event, like for video chats, and just how is it that they can engage more people in, let's say, a simpler task, but creating a larger impact by inviting others. So here's a small little example, right, of a no-sew blanket. So it can be created for you to give to your clients. And they can be video chatting with other people on Zoom and make a chat to really get those numbers up. Another option would really be for family-friendly projects. A lot of times, I personally get a lot of questions from families or parents asking about opportunities that their children can be a part of, and there isn't a lot. There tends to be a distinct age restriction with a lot of volunteer opportunities, but I think many times these nonprofits aren't thinking about how they can engage those younger audiences. So thinking about creating, let's say as an example, appreciation or recognition items for your volunteers, something simple like creating thank you letters and including templates for ideas, as well as, you know, your clients tend to be senior citizens and you're afraid of their isolation. So asking these families to create fun activities for seniors to get them engaged, like bingo or word search or food recipes. And that's as simple as printing paper, or the kids can help create those cards. Another fun, more creative way would be to create a video tutorial for those hands-on projects. And I have an example to show you of what that looks like, but just making it a little bit more interactive and something that is also shareable so people can share that via media. And as well as small little campaigns like collecting change like pennies for a short period of time and then being able to donate those. I've also seen creative STEM kits for students where you just simply collect miscellaneous items like buttons or bottle caps so that they can create STEM curriculum for that for the students.
Hey Lolly, it's Ursula. I wanted to
Yes.
point out that family-friendly projects are amazing for companies because remember, everybody that works at a company probably has a family, and I can tell you that their time is very valuable. So many companies won't allow their employees to go during the day, a work day, but will also encourage their folks with a match. So again, there is that financial piece later on if their employees go out and volunteer. So if they can go and volunteer with their family, they can volunteer and get engaged like they want to. They can really bring their family together, which we know most of us don't have enough time with our families, although right now that might be a little bit different statement. But going forward, and then of course, you know, that there could be possibly that match financially. So just know having, you know, family projects really opens you up to those corporations and the way that they can meet or the way that they need to engage with you for their business.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So I'll quickly show you guys the example of a video tutorial that Grandma's House of Hope used recently to create some sort of reusable bag. So let me know if you guys can hear this.
Hey, Lolly, we're not able to hear it.
Oh, to hear it, you said? Let's see. Try that again.
There you go.
Sorry about that. So that was just a quick little example. I thought it was a perfect way to look at how you can turn your toolkit into a small video. As you can see, she really laid down the steps, and as well as it was helpful to see how that bag was created, as well as she gave all the information about what Grandma's House of Hope does and who you would contact if you had questions. And there's, again, like little samples for the thank you cards and collecting those pennies, something easy that a family and children can really be a part of. So another option would be thinking of supplies or donations that are needed for you writing your programs. So again, it would be important to, not only see a list of food items, but who's the food going to, who does it benefit, and why is it important for these volunteers to help you out right now as opposed to a month later. So you really want to make sure that you share and that you're a little open with your volunteers about that piece. And the way that you can potentially do it as a post is you can list all the items out that are necessary, and you can set it up so that after volunteers sign up, they automatically receive an email with the location, and they can already have the drop-off dates or times on the description. So it doesn't require a lot of communication with your volunteers. As well as you can encourage your volunteers to participate in a curbside pickup for supplies, which we hope isn't the case, but in that instance, still practicing that social distancing, as well as recognition items for those volunteers that you will be receiving donations from. So here is a example of what a post would look like for those supplies drives. Okay, and this is a live example from our Emergency Volunteer Center from Project Hope Alliance. But as you can see, they gave a little information as to their situation right now, that they do have supplies, but only enough for a limited amount of families. And this is their call to action to these volunteers. And below, they note down the food items and cleaning supplies that are needed, and they note the drop-off times. And this is the way that they set it up. So as soon as the volunteers sign up for this opportunity, they receive the address for that drop-off location and are then able to complete the project and just turn it into the organization. Sorry about this. Okay. And then next, just a little bit about, and Ursula will touch more on skill-based opportunities and scoping that out. But really thinking about how the volunteer onboarding process can still be completed online, such as scheduling those orientations or emailing documents to review, as well as phone calls. So it's important to, just to remember that we are living in a very virtual world, and, a lot of nonprofits have transferred over from working remotely, and all the things that we are able to do now because of this, disaster related. But just thinking about those opportunities, so you can still create a plan for check-ins with these volunteers, virtual volunteers, and also thinking ahead of those resources that you can give them for challenging tasks that you're afraid is really necessary for those hands-on or more physical volunteers. As a small example, OneOC has, as many of you guys seen, the hands-on connect system and what that looks like. And I know personally I've gotten a lot of questions about families and creating a team and how can they have their children added to the registration. So it became a little task that instead of avoiding to repeat the same information, I created a small guide. So this is what a potential toolkit can look like as well. Really just noting down the steps, giving some screenshots to just familiarize the volunteers in our system and just get them to accomplish this faster. So thinking ahead of those potential challenging tasks that your virtual volunteers can encounter, and just what kind of guides or resources can you provide to them to make it easy. So that's a small little example. And then as well as opportunities such as tutoring or mentoring, right? A lot of you have services that tend to be more hands-on or direct with their clients. So what kind of video conference calls can you use, such as GoToMeeting or Zoom, or sharing certain documents like Google Docs to really collaborate work. So a small example would be, can you schedule a certain amount of study hours so that your clients can call in or email questions? Can you use Google Docs to share resumes and really comment on those and review those samples, as well as host virtual mock interviews? So that's just a little small way to think about those virtual opportunities. And here are some real life examples. So up top, we have what Stand Up for Kids is doing right now. They are a mentoring program working with 18 to 24-year-olds who are homeless or at risk of being homeless. So the reality is, right, of course, due to the situation, the protocol is preventing them from organizing youth face-to-face weekly meetings. So what they're doing about it is turning those into virtual meetings. So they have group meetings as well as one-on-one meetings with the mentors to really help them through that journey. As well as below here, we have a smaller example for Blind Children's Learning Center, and they had a walk organized, and what they did was they turned it into a virtual walk, encouraging other volunteers to just log in at a certain time, and they'll be doing their walks together, such as a certain amount of steps or walking around your apartment. And they really list those easy ways to help those individuals who were interested in signing up for the walk and how they can still be a part of that just from their home. And they had a cute idea for Workout Wednesdays where they'd be posting videos to really get their clients engaged. I thought that was a perfect example too. For that, did we have any other questions before I lead back to Ursula? All right, Ursula, I think the next slide might be you.
All right, thanks, Lolly. I appreciate that. So we're going to really jump into how to scope out a project. As we talked about skill-based volunteers and looked at that culture of philanthropy, that continuum from hands-on to the financial resources piece, you know, there's quite a few levels of skill-based volunteers. But I think this applies to all of them, especially when you're getting them in gap projects or getting them on a special area where you expertise that you know that you don't necessarily have right now or have never had, and yet you can benefit from, you know, the expert in this field. So I really call it, this is 5 easy steps to scope out your project. And it is until we get to that last one, because that's where the real work goes in. So the first step is, if you can click to the next slide, sorry. Okay, so the first step is, you know, why does your organization need this skill-based volunteer? You really do need to be able to make a case for this. And going back to what Lolly said, you know, when we're putting together those virtual toolkits, again, making sure they're connecting back to your mission, connecting back to why this is crucial, especially if we're talking about an urgent need for COVID-19, why they should get involved and why they need to take action today. So in this example, we were, you know, focusing on a marketing situation. So currently the organization has no marketing support. You know, like many of us, we're kind of figuring it out or getting who we can to do our social or maybe write a press release. But we really are looking for those experts in those areas. So the goal with this project was, in order to reach 100 new nonprofit members, we would need to develop and implement a strategic marketing plan and create a new infographic. So, hey, they want the plan put together, they want the graphic that now they can use that as their new vision to sell the project. So the step 2 is really, what are the skills that are crucial to this project? In this case, in this example, it's looking for volunteers that have experience in creative design, specifically, obviously, that infographic, because they want that graphic to look really well, and some proven experience in developing as well as implementing a marketing plan. So not only do they need to have experience coming up with a strategic plan when it comes to the marketing side, but they need to have shown you that they have implemented it. So there's a difference between developing it and handing it to someone else, as we know, or that person is now going to be that boots on the ground to take it into action. And I think, you know, having both of those experiences is going to get you the expert in that area. Flip to the next slide. So step number 3 is really about this being virtual. So right now we're in a virtual world. So, but does this position, is it really going to be 100% virtual? So thinking about the future or when this project gets planned or the gap that you have, in this example, the volunteers will work virtual, which is great. That's what we need them to do. But they're also in the future going to need to be at leadership meetings on the 3rd Thursday of the month from 2 to 3. If obviously we have the aspect of social distancing has calmed down. And that might end up being a virtual, you know, leadership meeting. But if you do expect people to show up into your warehouse or your office or into, you know, maybe one of your offsite facilities to see what's happening or bringing that mission alive, and that might need to happen even during our virtual world, please make sure that you're putting that out there right away. I can't even tell you how many times people have said, oh yeah, it's all virtual, and then all of a sudden, you know, they were going into the office, you know, almost once a week. Or on the other side, they said it was a virtual position, but it really wasn't. And you know, the organization really didn't trust them to work virtually, or did not have the tools and resources like Lolly was just talking about, like with the Google Docs and the Zoom and the Share and all these things that now we are having to do no matter what, right? We're being forced into this world whether we like it or not. And that's going to make us stronger. That's going to make us better. But just make sure that you're defining how comfortable you are, how trusted you are with this position and the way that is going to work best for you. The other thing, our step 4, is really about your recruitment and onboarding timeline. So I've seen a lot of great people apply for things, and then there's kind of no action after that, which then we lose them. We lose this amazing person, especially right now. People want to volunteer immediately. I get emails almost hourly. I'm a finance person. I'm a marketing person. Which is fantastic. That's exactly what we want. But if we don't end up finding a place for them, engaging those people that have reached out to us at one of our nonprofits, we're going to lose them. You know, right now, even if we can just, which we do, we reach back to them and get them to upload their resume and their skills so that we have more detailed information on them. We, of course, encourage what's in our urgent needs with our EVC and suggest you know, organizations that would fit based on what they're telling us, so that they can, again, click on that posting and hopefully get connected with you guys. So just know, if you have a very clear understanding of how you would, you know, this is my timeline that people can express interest for a couple weeks, and then I'm going to do some pre-screen interviews, and then I'm going to do some interviews with the actual supervisor that's going to be leading or partnering with this skill-based volunteer, and then when do I really want to do the onboarding and orientation. If you have that worked out, I think that is so much easier to recruit your volunteers as well as to keep them engaged in that process. Okay, next slide. So finally, you know, I talked about 5 easy steps, and we're at step 5, so all those were super easy, and this one is super easy too, but it takes work. And that's where, you know, that question that came earlier, you know, why doesn't this work out? In most cases, it's because we really didn't do step 5, and even if we did step 5, we might have changed step 5. So we put some things down, and then we changed what really the expectations were. When you scope out a project, you need to make sure that you're commenting on the specific tasks, the number of hours to take those or to get that work done, and the timeline. If you can't identify that or figure that out, it's probably not the right time to do that kind of a project unless you don't care about the timeline, unless you're like, well, if this gets done tomorrow, that's great, but if it gets done by the end of the year, that's okay too. If you have a project like that, then that's fantastic for skill-based volunteers because they've got a lot of flexibility. There's some accountability and challenges in that and keeping engaged with those volunteers in the right way. But again, if it's a project that doesn't have to be done by a specific timeline, then you do have a little bit more flexibility in step 5. Although, again, like I said, you definitely need to have that accountability partner so that the project is moving forward and in the way that you want it, and the volunteer is clear that feedback and the way that they're doing it is still on target the way that your organization needs it. So just making sure you're having those touch base moments. So in this case, we're talking about that infographic and that marketing plan that they want, that the organization needs. So part 1 is really about gathering data. It's like, okay, we want you to attend the volunteer orientation, then we want you to meet with the supervisor, then we want you to attend the leadership meeting, then we're going to have you meet with the program coordinator to go over goals. So in this case, that's a lot of virtual meetings. So even setting that up for the volunteer might be, an initial challenge, but yet if they're not talking to the right people and getting the right data, and synthesizing that information, they're not going to be successful for you. So in part 2, it's really about taking what they learned in part 1 and then putting that into action. So in this case, they were going to, review current marketing practices. They were going to suggest a new target, kind of do a little draft of the marketing plan, and then meet back up, with the director to say, okay, so how are we doing? Is this on target? And that's where those touch base meetings are so important, because it's clarifying for the volunteer as well as making sure that your expectations are being met by that volunteer, because it's your organization and your organization best. They might have done part 1 and got more up to speed with your mission and the way that you need things done, but they don't know it like you do. So making sure that that you guys are on the same page is just so important. And then you'll see that part 3 is really about finishing that process up. They finally developed that infographic. They again are coming back to that leadership meeting, probably showing that infographic and the final marketing plan and how this would be implemented, and doing a final debrief. So it's really about looking at this from a consulting mindset and going, again, if I was hiring this person to do this, how many hours am I hiring them for? What am I really asking them to do? And how do I need to get them up to speed to be able to accomplish this task? So if we need someone to help us in technology, they might know 10 times more, which is why we're getting them involved as a skill-based volunteer about how to do Zoom and how to use Google Docs, and but they don't know about your organization, and maybe you have a staff team that has never used Zoom before, and now they're going to need to teach them step by step. And I was certainly one of those people that used technology, but was certainly not an expert. And now my team is helping me to become more successful, and certainly volunteers are a part of that team as well. So I just wanted to kind of give you those 5 steps. If you can follow that process, it's fantastic when we're talking about posting the project, just like as Lolly showed you the posting of the donation supplies. Again, putting this kind of details in the posting is fine. If you don't feel comfortable putting all of these details in the posting, make sure you're at least doing steps 1 through 4 in that posting, because that is going to get you the right volunteer to take action. This might be too much for them, or maybe, like you said, you just don't need to share some more, let's say, sensitive information until you talk to the volunteer in the way and feel comfortable about the trust factor. But again, getting to this level with the volunteer and making sure that from the orientation piece to the debrief piece, you are engaged with them just like you would do with anyone else, especially if we were, of course, had to use our own financial resources for hire. So on that, I'm going to pause for questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, I have another question. With the, I was thinking of incentives for people with skills-based volunteering, and I'm wondering if we're working with, let's say, a corporation or a company, could we give them the time that it takes for them to do orientation and even the debrief? Can we add those hours and say, hey, you can use these hours towards your volunteer hours? Or
absolutely. That is all a part. If you think of you're hiring a staff person, they're going to get paid for that, right? So So we should be honoring that as volunteering, because in order for them to be successful, we want them to be an expert at our organization, or an expert in our mission, or an expert in this particular skill that they're coming through. So yes, oh my gosh, yes. Other questions?
I have a question about the thank you, if there's some ideas about how to give a thank you at the time of, say, a donation drop off. Like, and right now with the contactless, incentives, what do you have any ideas?
I'll jump in for a second and then I'll let Lolly jump back in. So I know that organizations have had volunteers remotely do thank you cards, and then those were either dropped off or sent in. Some were, literally mailed in. And then when people were doing the donation, dropping off the donations, they were handing out a card that another volunteer had done. That's super powerful. Imagine if these kids from Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, made these cards, and then you're handing it to the family that dropped that off. That's that full circle. So the more that you can have more people do and take it off your plate, it's not only easier, but it's so the right thing to do. Then we're really engaging people. It's just so much fun. Lolly, you got some tips?
Yeah, I love that. I was also thinking more of in the form of kind of like an e-card, but maybe it's like taking a picture of them when they're dropping their items off and posting about them and just thinking.
Yeah, we're doing that.
Okay, that's awesome. You guys are already doing that. Also, as well as like sort of blog posts. But yeah, I've seen definitely, as Ursula mentioned, just a contactless drop off for the thank you card or sending those in.
In terms of e-cards, does anyone have any suggestions on where to get those e-cards? Because I've been looking around and trying to find the best looking e-cards, and I'm just curious if anyone has like a program or something they use.
This is Ursula. So we do have a subscription program that we use for our team, our staff and volunteers, for like birthdays and other things like that, because we used to send around the card and then someone wouldn't sign the card or the card got lost. I don't remember. We weren't doing a very good job of getting it to the people and the volunteers. So then we went with this virtual system. I can certainly make sure that that particular company is when we send this presentation out, that's included there. But I don't know if there's anyone else on the phone that has used like a great organization.
We only use our social media as an outlet to say thank you. So Donna, actually, we've been working with you.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. It's nice to put a face to the.
It is.
Yeah.
So we have also on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts, and we are trying to post pictures of our volunteers on there. But it doesn't necessarily reach as broad an audience, and it's not as, it does get linked to that person most of the time, but not all the time. So I'd rather have something sent directly to them. That'd be
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Anne.
So that is a great segue into our final section. And I know we only got a couple minutes. So I want to make sure we value your time and don't keep you longer in this crazy world that we're in right now. If you can go to the next slide for our social volunteer influencers. So just know that's really what we're promoting right now, is how can people, this is probably the best, I always say, they say, what's the number one volunteer opportunity that people should get engaged in? I'm like, the best thing you can do is have them be ambassadors for your organization. They may not do one thing except tell another person how great your organization is, and that is worth way more than packing food boxes or donations. I mean, that's gonna get you all of those things that you need. So we really are trying to encourage, especially when we get around Earth Day, to tell people about your mission and encourage them to share your mission and encourage them to share just what you were talking about, those stories, those posts, those thank yous to other people in their own networks, because of course we all do have our own networks. Next slide. So the challenge is really, we're going to kick it off on Earth Day. Hopefully some of you will have posted some toolkits by then, or some urgent needs, and we'll make sure that that is all a part of that. And we're going to push out stuff to our network and then encourage them to take this challenge. So each day between Earth Day and the end of the month with our Spirit of Volunteerism Awards, you know, share someone's mission, comment on someone that did great volunteer work. If you had a volunteer that you're, of course, honoring in Spirit of Volunteerism, like their blog page or talk about them in a post and then share it with more folks. So we're really going to try and make this a huge social deal. Of course, it's going to be a virtual Spirit of Volunteerism, so it needs to be a big deal. But it's not just about that. It's the lead up to that, and then it's how do we do this afterwards in better ways. So just know you're going to get some more information about that. And if you go to the last slide. And so, you know, in terms of getting involved, you know, we're encouraging you in the next week to, you know, post any urgent needs that you have. If you need help with that, we certainly can help you get those things posted. I know people are a little more settled now in this new normal. But if you, again, if you don't have time, if you need help, we'll help you. We'll get those things up. Participate in our social volunteer influencer challenge. We'll have some templates that you can reuse, and again, share your own stuff. We're going to be sharing your stuff as well. If you want to get on our online calendar, it's not an urgent need, but you want some things, some projects and things up there for the future, please do so. Because if we can share your mission, if we can honor your volunteers, if we can ask volunteers to pledge and like your pages, again, as we not only move through this crisis, but as we move into our new normal, we really are going to have a huge database to be able to engage in the right way. So I applaud you for joining us today. I know this was a lot of time. Thank you so much for what you're doing. We want to be here to support and get the word out, and we're hoping by getting a few more of those toolkits that we'll not only be able to get the word out, but get whatever you need to you as soon as possible. So on that, I'm going to pause for our final questions, and thank you again.